Has now said that they believe at the moment this is a lone wolf model. They believe this killer was radicalized after he left Uzbekistan sometime between now and the year 2010. Said he was a truck driver with some violations and run-ins with the law, but nothing much more specific than that. And no evidence, he believes at the moment, that he was part of a larger plot. With regard to his hospitalization, we do know, based on reports, that we think he's out of surgery, and apparently at least overnight and perhaps in the early morning hours he was talking with investigators. We are at the intersection of Greenwich and Chambers. We are in the shadow of the World Trade Center. If you walked about 35 yards to my left at the intersection of Greenwich and Reed, that is where we stood for 6 weeks during our coverage September 11th, 9/11. Stuyvesant High School down to my right about 100 yards. That's where that pickup truck ended after driving almost a mile along this skinny, narrow bike path. Again, killing 8 and wounding 11 more. The witnesses who saw it yesterday described what they saw this way.
We were having class, and a couple of my classmates, they already heard the shots, and then we went to the window and we seen 2 of the bodies lying down. A bunch of bicycles, they were on the floor. It was really chaotic.
We just ran to the window and you just see the dead bodies just laying there.
I hear all the noise, and when I go back and I look, I see, a truck a few more blocks down going down the bike path. And for some reason, I went that way. And when I went that way, I seen a couple of bodies laying right there in the bike path.
The first thing I saw was a man laying on the ground, face down in the middle of the street. He was surrounded by police officers. It appeared that he was injured. And right next to him was a man who was being arrested. He wasn't putting up a fight. He was on his knees, hands behind his head.
That suspect has been identified as Sayfullo Saipov. He is currently hospitalized and in police custody. An immigrant from Uzbekistan who came to the U.S. on a diversity visa back in 2010. He's previously lived in Ohio and Florida before moving to New Jersey. And we're told he's 29 years old, married, and has 2 children. Investigators say they found a note near his truck pledging allegiance to ISIS. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio saying the motive is clear.
This was an act of terror, and a particularly cowardly act of terror aimed at innocent civilians, aimed at people going about their lives who had no idea of what was about to hit them.
The new terrorist tactic, which they've called for publicly, are these lone wolves who commit an act of terror. At this point, there's no evidence to suggest a wider plot or a wider scheme.
President Trump, meantime, tweeting, "My thoughts, condolences, and prayers to the victims and families of the New York City terrorist attack. God and your country are with you." David Lee Miller is live at the scene in Lower Manhattan right now. David, good morning.
Good morning, Sandra. This is an intense and ongoing investigation, and underscoring that, I was here minutes after the attack took place yesterday. At this hour, 17 hours after the attack, that rented pickup truck is still in place as investigators try to determine more about what took place. The rampage lasted less than half an hour over a distance of about 2 miles along Manhattan's west side. Authorities now know what happened, but they're still trying to figure out why. As you mentioned, the suspect here, 29-year-old Sayfullo Saipov, allegedly drove that pickup truck into more than a dozen cyclists and pedestrians along a bike path. He then rammed that vehicle into a school bus. He then ran through the streets of Lower Manhattan, brandishing a paint gun and a pellet gun. Witnesses say he was shouting Allah Akbar in Arabic, "God is great." The horror finally came to an end when he was shot by police. He is now, we are told, still in Bellevue Hospital. He is out of surgery. He has been shot in the abdomen. He is soon, we are told, going to be placed in the prison ward. And just moments ago on our sister network, FBN, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo talked about the suspect's ties to terror. Listen.
There's no doubt that he was ISIS affiliated, related, or had an affection for ISIS. But it was, all evidence points to that lone wolf model. We're going through the social media now, but there has been no evidence thus far of group associations.
Saipov is from the former Soviet Republic of Uzbekistan. He is not a U.S. citizen. He had a green card. He came to the United States legally in 2010, as you mentioned, using the diversity visa program. Perhaps you've never heard of that. It is better known as the visa lottery. He lived in Ohio, Florida, and most recently in New Jersey. And it has been widely reported that a note that was left behind in that rented pickup truck, written in Arabic, said that he had pledged allegiance to ISIS. There was also an image in that truck of an ISIS flag. We expect, Sandra, to learn a great deal more about this suspect when authorities hold a news conference at 11 o'clock this morning. Back to you.
We'll surely get to that when it begins. David Lee, thank you.
Always a great source of information, too, in the briefings happen. More now in the suspect's home country, Uzbekistan, a nation of nearly 30 million, 88% of which are Muslim. It borders Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and gained independence in 1991 after the fall of the Soviet Union. The terror analysts believe that a number of Uzbekis have joined ISIS, but there is no data of just how many people that might be. Sandra.
Bill, vehicle attacks have become increasingly common, as we know, in recent years, mainly across Europe. Since 2014, terrorists have used cars and trucks to kill more than 140 people. We saw it less than 3 months ago in Barcelona. A van plowing into a crowd there, killing 13 people and wounding 130 others. 5 months ago in London, 3 men drove a van onto the sidewalk of the London Bridge and then stabbed people at a market. 8 people were killed, nearly 50 others injured. Last year in France, the driver of a tractor trailer targeted a crowd of people celebrating Bastille Day in Nice. 86 were killed. And last year in Berlin, a driver hijacked a truck and drove it into a Christmas market. That attack claimed 12 lives. Bill?
Yeah. House Homeland Security Committee Chair, Congressman Mike McCall, he's been talking a lot now and quickly blaming radical Islamic terror, saying the incident in New York City here has all the signs of this ISIS-style attack that we have seen too often.
It has all the hallmarks. When somebody yells Allahu Akbar in public, when somebody mows down pedestrians, and following the advice of the ISIS Sheikh Adnani, I am convinced, it's my judgment, that this was an ISIS attack.
So for more on this, I'm joined by Buck Sexton, former CIA analyst. He's been watching this and discussing with us for some time. If you look at the literature, the radical literature, you pinpoint about 12 months ago when they talked about incidents like these.
There was specifics for exactly an attack like this put out in the Islamic State's online magazine called Rumiyah, and it went through everything that you see here in terms of target selection, secondary weapons carried by the person conducting the terrorist conducting the attack, as well as leaving a note so that it is known and there is no question that this was done in the name of the Islamic State. So if you look at what ISIS was calling its adherents to do, its ideological fellow travelers to do almost exactly a year ago, this was a point-by-point recreation of that. You can also go back to 2010 with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and their description of creating a mowing machine as a terrorist instrument, which was a pickup truck. But the ISIS Rumiyah issue, I think, is the one that really walks through how to make a mass casualty attack just like this happen.
And that is easily accessible.
Absolutely. It's on the internet for anybody to see.
You know, I think about July 2016 in East France. That was really the big moment that stands out in the minds of many. You get a refrigerated truck that's rented. It has a lot of weight behind it. You wait for the crowd to come walking at you, and you go after them. Very similar to what we saw yesterday. And what we note here, Buck, is that the driver pinpoints people. As they go down the path, they're looking for people to strike.
What we've seen is that the biggest jihadist entities in the world, Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, have recognized for years now, but it has accelerated in the last 12 to 18 months, that lower tech, no-skill terror attacks can in fact be much more effective and much more likely to create a mass casualty incident. Oftentimes, some of the biggest and most dangerous plots that would have been enacted in the past fell apart because of the lack of operational security, skill, and planning of the radicalized individuals who wanted to conduct the attack. What we see here is anyone can drive a truck into a crowd of people.
Right. Well, if he has a driver's license, and if that driver's license was valid, what's to stop him at a Home Depot 2 miles from here from renting that truck and doing whatever he can with it?
The only possibility of stopping an attack like this would be to get the individual or individuals at the planning phase and the preparation phase. Once he goes operational with a vehicle attack, now you're hoping that either he makes a mistake or you have good Samaritans and first responders, law enforcement that intervenes before it can become a mass casualty incident.
Last night, the description was called flashbang, meaning the terrorists will enact the plot and carry it out before the police can react. You rent a truck at 2 o'clock, you hit the sidewalk at 3:05. That's 65 minutes, Buck.
If you have a clean background, meaning there's nothing there that raises any red flags, if you don't have anything from a law enforcement perspective that not only is actionable for the purposes of surveillance, but also for a possible arrest, and you move quickly on an attack like this, it is almost impossible to prevent, which is why these jihadist groups have been putting out there to their adherents, don't try to build a big bomb. That's difficult. You can make a mistake. You can have what happened outside of Barcelona, where the bomb-making factory went up, which is why they then went to the secondary plan of vehicle attacks. In this instance, they're saying, especially if you have no connectivity to an actual trainer, somebody who has walked you through the steps of terrorism, a vehicle attack is much more likely, and this is something that's very difficult for us to counteract.
We are going to call on your expertise a lot over the next several hours, okay? Buck Sexton down here in Lower Manhattan with me. Don't go far, okay? Sandra, back to you in studio for more.
All right, thanks, Bill. A lot more on this coming up. We have General Jack Keane at the bottom of the hour. We want to ask him about Uzbekistan, the country from where the suspect comes. What does he know about that country and its ties to terror? He will be then followed by Congressman Peter King. He'll have a lot to say on this, as well as Senator Rand Paul joins us, all coming up.
Also, that investigation now spreading clear into New Jersey. At this hour, officials spreading out multiple locations in that state, and not far from our location here, literally within 2.5 miles at some point, up to 15 miles at others. Live from the mosque where he worshipped, Fox News coverage of the terror attack here in New York City will continue after this.
There's multiple people on the ground, Central. We need buses from Houston all the way down to Chambers. I got 4 or 5 people on the ground. This is a mass casualty situation here.
Do not know already, waiting for answers here in Lower Manhattan. Department of Homeland Security and the FBI now on the scene of the terror attack here in New York City. I want to bring in Daniel Linsky, former Boston Superintendent, Chief of Police, but also want to bring in Ron Hosko, the former Assistant Director of the FBI. He's on telephone. And Ron, good morning to you. You were the one who had this phrase last night on our coverage called flash to bang. Describe what that means right now in the terrorist radical world and how it's being implemented, Ron. If we got you on the phone, go ahead. Okay, we just lost his connection. We'll try and get him back in a moment here. Ron, if you hear me, I'll go back to you. Meanwhile, Daniel Linsky from Boston, I want to bring you in on the Boston bombing, March of 2013. In the moments and hours after that, what did you do with your suspects? And what sort of information were you able to gain from them based on your actions, Dan?
Once we determined that it was related to Islamic extremism and that they were taking action against us as enemy combatants, a decision was made by us and the FBI. The FBI asked us to help with it. We gave the information to our officers not to Mirandize the subject. That allowed us to treat him as an enemy combatant, to not give him the standard rights that a citizen of the U.S. has. And we were able to get some intelligence from him from some extended interviews that we would not have had the opportunity to do had he been Mirandized at the time of his arrest.
Well, they know a lot about this killer already here in New York City. What are investigators doing now between the hospital and a prison cell at the moment?
Yeah, we want to find out who helped him logistically, if there was any signs out there. Is he associated with other groups? Was he radicalized with others? Are there other people in his sphere of influence that we need to be concerned of before they go operational with some type of activity?
How much do you think they know about him now? My sense is a lot. I mean, we've been
they know what
we have more information in 12 hours than we had about the Vegas killer last month.
Yeah, they know a ton about him right now, Bill, and they'll know more in the coming hours and weeks to come. But they're going to dig in as deep as they can and find out, recreate his life, find out who he's been talking with, who he's been associated with, and see if anyone shares his desire to attack innocent people as they ride on bicycles in a great city.
I bet his family has some answers, too. Daniel Linsky, thank you from Boston. By telephone, we have the connection back with Ron Hosko. And Ron, I just want to go back to phrasing the question, flash to bang. What does that mean now in the radical terrorist world?
Bill, the attack methodology and recruitment and space that law enforcement has to work, there are fears today, and we heard it echoed by the MI5 chief 2 weeks ago, about the speed of attacks, from ideation to action. And the FBI has talked about this for the last few years. It's the space between flash and bang, the space that typically law enforcement has to work. With Al-Qaeda years ago, a decade ago, they would maybe recruit you here, but they wanted you to travel to Waziristan, northwest Pakistan or Afghanistan to come to one of their training camps. Now, ISIS has a completely different methodology, and that is online inspiration, come as you are, attack with the tools at hand, even though they're giving suggestions. And that model for attack gives law enforcement very little space to work between flash and bang. That is a concern across
that means that
law enforcement.
Yeah, that means they're getting better. 65 minutes from the point where he rented this truck to the moment where he hopped the sidewalk at Houston and the West Side Highway along the Hudson River, Ron.
Yeah, it's very concerning. You know, law enforcement talks in terms of moving left of bang, and how much space is in there. And too often now, the attack is in the mind of one person. They're not giving off the emanations, although I'm sure we will see that there were indicators here. And there's precious little room for law enforcement to work and to defeat these attacks, and it's a great concern.
So true. What a challenge it is. Ron, thank you for your expertise. Daniel Linsky, prior to that, in Boston, Massachusetts. You bet. Back to Lower Manhattan in a moment. Sandra, to you now in the studio.
Bill, brand new reaction coming in from the scene after a suspected terrorist plows a truck through a bike lane and then rams into a bus carrying school children.
There's a kid stuck on this whole other side of that bus is caved in. That's just caved in. It was like a T-bone accident, apparently. It's really nasty. I wonder if we know those kids, you know?
The deadly terror attack here in Lower Manhattan. He's done a number of interviews as well, and we expect to see him perhaps later this morning live at that briefing. He called the suspect a, quote, depraved coward who did not succeed in terrorizing New Yorkers. And we're also getting this raw video of the emotion and the shock after the suspect rammed that truck into a school bus.
Oh my God! Okay, I need an ambulance right here. Right here. The guy T-boned. Come on, there's a kid right there. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Amazing stuff. Cameras are everywhere too, and they can capture so much. 2 kids, 2 adults on that bus. And as it stands right now, 8 are dead, at least 11 others injured in the attack here in Lower Manhattan. And Sandra used to live in this part of New York City, and I've been in this town for more than 15 years, and I can tell you, when we showed up here about 2 hours ago, this is a neighborhood that was just bustling. Families and kids going to the school here and the park across the street. It's a commercial area as well, so there was so much business. The subway was packed. You think about the Halloween parade last night that typically gets 1 million visitors on both sides of 6th Avenue. It went on as planned, and it just makes you stop and wonder and think. Where all the terrorists has happened in so many other parts of the world, and they pick up with their lives so quickly and they move forward. I think about Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. I think about Damascus and Baghdad, and you almost get the sense here in New York City, yeah, we're resilient, but there is a sense that we are getting used to a level of expectation when something like this happens, and we say to each other, well, I'm still going to dinner. My kids are still going to school. We're still going out for Halloween. And I felt that in New York City last night. And you just wonder, among others that we live with as neighbors and colleagues at Fox News and here in New York City, whether or not they feel a similar sense after what we experienced yesterday.
And so many of us, Bill, have spent so much time in that neighborhood. As you mentioned, I used to live with my family in that neighborhood. I'm sure you standing right there, you see baby buggies, you see families. It is known as an area, a neighborhood in Manhattan that is very family friendly. You're standing with a park right over your shoulder there, multiple schools right in that area. And you mentioned that school bus, Bill. The timing of this attack was so important. I want to point out that it began just after 3 p.m. when many of those school children in that area were just being let out of their school and walking on that very jogging path. And that school bus, 2 adults, 2 school children injured and transported to the hospital in this attack. A horrific thing at a horrific time in a neighborhood filled with families, Bill.
Yeah, and as we describe, you know, what we're seeing now, Sandra, just off to my right, about 100 yards down to the main intersection, there are investigators in white coats now moving across the intersection looking for whatever more physical evidence they can have. Yeah. So it's a pretty stunning sight when the school's right across the street. Yep. And life indeed does go on.
All right,
Sandra.
More to come on this, Bill. Meanwhile, the suspected New York City attacker entering the city from New Jersey, where he lived. And now new reports suggest the mosque that Sayfullo Saipov attended had been under NYPD surveillance. Rob Schmidt is live in Paterson, New Jersey, outside that mosque. Rob, what are you learning there?
Yeah, hey, Sandra, the epicenter of this investigation is now going to move into this area, maybe 15, 20 miles outside of the city. We're in Paterson, New Jersey, and the mosque right behind me, the Omar Mosque, is one that has been on the radar of the NYPD, even though we're in New Jersey, under the radar of the New York Police Department since 2005, and all that mosque surveillance that began happening after 9/11. We can tell you that the suspect in this, Saipov, lived in the apartment building that literally butts right up against this mosque. And we're trying to get a timeline right now on how long he has been here, because one man that goes to the mosque says that nobody at the mosque really recognized the picture, and says that they don't think he's been here very long. So that begs the question: did he come here into the New York area, into the Northeast, just to commit this horrible act, or has he been here for longer than that? He was here on a visa, what's called a diversity visa, which is our country's way of kind of extending a hand out to other countries of the world. This was taken advantage of in this case, it certainly sounds like. He had moved to Florida in 2010, so he's been in the country for about 7 years from Uzbekistan. He rented that truck from a Home Depot in Passaic, which is right down the street here, and then drove into the city, and then flipped off the Holland Tunnel, we assume, and moved down the West Side Highway onto that bike path and committed all of that carnage. But he was shot in the leg by a hero police officer that stopped this rampage, and now he is out of surgery and is being questioned by, I'm sure, the FBI as well as local authorities, the NYPD as well.
And according to recent reports, will be transported to jail soon. Rob Schmidt, thank you.
Yeah.
Bill?
Sandra, there are more details emerging now in the background of the killer. Sayfullo Saipov is his name, age 29. What the investigators say they found, and when they ran his name through their database, and this is surprising. That information up next.
It's really scary knowing that you have another person literally in front of you that could possibly do something like that. It's really bad.
Digging into the background of Sayfullo Saipov, the man accused of killing at least 8 people with a truck here in Lower Manhattan. Here is what we know so far. He's originally from Uzbekistan. He came here to the U.S. in 2010. He has a Florida driver's license, but was living in Paterson, New Jersey. Uber confirming that he worked for them as a driver and passed a background check for them. Authorities tell Fox News he left handwritten notes pledging his allegiance to ISIS. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington with more on this. Catherine?
Thank you, Sandra. 2 sources tell Fox News that investigators ran Saipov through their databases after the attack, and his name popped in connection to a handful of individuals who are already known to law enforcement as part of a broader terrorism investigation. It's not clear from our reporting this morning whether it was a single case or multiple cases or whether the cases remain open, but Fox was told Saipov had close ties and, quote, the group he ruled with was known to law enforcement before the attack. After an initial review, the evidence points to an ISIS-inspired, not ISIS-directed attack, with the suspect following the ISIS-Al-Qaeda playbook to a T for using vehicles as weapons. Recent online propaganda instructed followers to use trucks, then launch a second attack using knives or guns, and to leave evidence at the scene linking the attack to the terror group, which is what happened in this case. This morning, the Republican chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee was asked about reports he came into the U.S. through a diversity program.
The lottery system, I've always been against it because it's a random system to bring people into the United States. It's not merit-based. Why aren't we, scrutinizing people over there before they can even get into the country with a higher vetting system, putting ICE agents over in consulate and embassy offices?
Source close to the matter says that based on the electronic evidence so far, the suspect was actively searching online for ISIS instructions for using vehicles as weapons. Sandra.
Catherine, has there been a claim of responsibility yet?
Well, there's been no official claim of responsibility through the ISIS media branch known as the Amaq News Service. But it's significant that known ISIS accounts, what counterterrorism analysts call leadership accounts, are applauding the attack, showing photos of the attack, and using an unusual hashtag at the slap of terrorism. We reviewed some of the online translations, and they refer to the ISIS spokesman al-Adnani, who was killed in a 2016 airstrike. And these posts talk about seeking revenge for his death. Sandra.
Catherine Herridge, thank you for your reporting on this. For more, we bring in General Jack Keane, retired four-star general, chairman at the Institute for the Study of War and a Fox News military analyst. General, your thoughts this morning coming in after watching this truck plow into pedestrians on a busy jogging strip of Manhattan. I mean, baby strollers, bicyclists. It's an unbelievable scene to see play out right here in New York City.
Yeah, horrific, to be sure. It's part of the ISIS playbook, and these are weapons of convenience available to anybody, certainly. But I think when we have acts like this, and we got to reflect on where are we. 25 years we've been dealing with radical Islam. When it first came to this city, they tried to blow up then the World Trade Center. And the fact is, radical Islam, Sandra, is thriving. It's growing. It's morphed into a global jihad. Al-Qaeda, despite all the victory laps we took after killing Osama bin Laden in 2012, is alive and well. ISIS, when we pulled out of Iraq and left that place alone, grew from several hundred fighters in 2012, several hundred, to 30,000 in 18 months, using the internet to recruit an entire organization. That organization is now in 30 countries. It is the organization that motivated this youngster to conduct an attack on people in this country.
29 years old, coming from Uzbekistan. Population 30 million people, 88% of that population is Muslim, mostly Sunni. What more can you tell us about Uzbekistan and its ties to terror?
Well, first of all, Uzbekistan, former Soviet republic, about 30 million people, as you indicated, mostly Muslim country, mostly Uzbeks there, about 80% of the people are. And they've been friendly to the United States. Yeah. It was from Uzbekistan that we conducted operations into Afghanistan to put the CIA in there, and then Special Operations Forces, etc. I flew in there myself after we took the Taliban down, met some of the local leaders. But they're also an authoritarian dictator, a lot of disenfranchised young people. A lot of them joined ISIS in Syria and also Al-Qaeda in Syria. This guy probably left the country like a lot of other Uzbeks did because he's dissatisfied. And a
struggling economic situation there as well. What historically, if you look back at the relationship we have had with them, the leader of Uzbekistan has actually reached out to President Trump in the wake of this attack and sent his condolences to the president, the families of the victims, offering his country's assistance in investigating this attack. In the wake of this, you're hearing a really friendly response from this country.
Well, it's not an unfriendly country to us. As I said, they cooperated with us with dealing with Afghanistan and the Taliban. But the reality is there's a lot of political repression in the country. There's a lot of human rights violations. But thankfully, if he's going to try to get into this a little bit, that'll be helpful.
All right. The idea of this lone wolf attack, you've heard the New York governor, Andrew Cuomo, calling this a lone wolf attack, saying that there's no evidence to suggest it was part of a wider plot. At the top of this hour, General, we ran through all of these types of attacks, trucks used as weapons in these terrorist attacks. Is it fair to call this a lone wolf attack?
You know, it's pretty astounding to have somebody in a governor's position to say something that absolutely makes no sense whatsoever. This individual has committed himself to the ideology of a worldwide terrorist organization called ISIS, and he's in regular communication with it, I'm assuming, at least on the internet. ISIS runs a virtual caliphate on the internet. Their operations are sophisticated on the internet. We're trying to push back against it, but they control an external terrorist organization, either direct it or they inspire it. He's a member of that organization. He is anything but a lone wolf, and we've got to stop using that language.
Before I let you go, the president's been tweeting about extreme vetting. He said, I've just ordered Homeland Security to step up our already extreme vetting program. Being politically correct is fine, but not for this. Would that have prevented this attack from happening?
I don't know that, but Europe should tell us. Open borders, mass migration with no vetting. We need to tighten up our immigration. We need to tighten up our vetting to be sure to protect our country, and we certainly need to tighten up our own border.
General Jack Keane, it's always good to get your insights. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, good to be here, Sandra.
All right. Bill, back to you in Lower Manhattan.
Yes, back here, Lower Manhattan here. I just want to show you a different camera about 150 yards behind me. You can see the crime scene here. Investigators are all over that Home Depot rental truck used by the terrorist suspect. A moment ago, you see the gentleman there in the white suit. They have about 12 of them, NYPD investigators, combing the ground, looking around that truck, and that's what's happening at the moment. 9:41 a.m. Eastern Time. We are not even 24 hours into this. In a moment, how and when was that suspect radicalized? That is one of the critical questions for investigators. They want answers as they try and prevent attacks like these here in New York or anywhere in America in the future.
Here's what I like about President Trump. The gloves are off. He's telling the military you can go after these guys wherever they go. You can kill them when you find them. You don't have to watch them drive away. Trump, he understands that we're in a religious war, and to the American people, we're fighting people who are compelled by their religious views to kill us all. They kill fellow Muslims who don't agree with their view of Islam. They kill Christians and vegetarians, libertarians, Jews, you name it. So we're in a war.
South Carolina